What's good, everybody? It's time for our weekly dose of Overlooked and Underplayed, the series where I show you 7 cards, one of each color, multicolor, and colorless, that are ran in under 10,000 decks. For plenty more Magic content, make sure to check out the channel. And with that, let's get into it. Up first for the white slot is Heavenly Blademaster. Heavenly Blademaster is 5 and a white for a 3/6 flying double strike. Whenever Heavenly Blademaster enters the battlefield, you may attach any number of auras and equipments you control to it. Other creatures you control get +1/+1 for each aura and equipment attached to Heavenly Blademaster. This is one of those cards that makes me want to build a whole deck around it. It would be really cool to run like an aura equipment deck, like for example, Galea, Kindler of Hope, with the token sub-theme, to flood the board with tokens using cards like Mary, Warden of Isengard, to end games with Heavenly Blademaster's giant buff. There's also space for this to be pretty good in a roll token deck. For example, Elevere of the Wild Court, where you can use cards like Siona, Captain of Pyleus, paired with Heavenly Blademaster, again, for a massive board buff. Keep in mind, Heavenly Blademaster does not have haste. This thing looks like me trying to run a mile back in high school, so boots and some haste, probably going to be a necessity if you want this as a win con. Flying in for the blue slot, we got Rishadan Brigand, which is notably a weird card. For 4 and a blue, we get a 3/2 flying. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices a permanent unless they pay 3. And it can only block creatures with flying. Yeah, this one's super strange. But for how niche the ability is in blue, it's definitely worth considering, especially if you're in one specific deck. If you've got an Orvar, the All-Form deck, running some blink effects like Planar Incision, along with this thing, yeah, that's a lot of these triggers going off. I'd also say more often than not, people are pretty efficient with their mana, more often than not leaving 2 mana open to threaten a counterspell, making this guy's ability pretty easy in my eyes to have go off. Same goes for like a lower power Yurok deck. As that deck runs some blink effects, you get double of this guy's triggers. Not to even mention pairing it with something like Deadeye Navigator to machine gun some board wipe. Honestly, this thing's pretty buns outside the mono blue blink deck or something specific like that, but again, cool for blue. Saravok Deathbringer comes in at the black slot for 3 and a black, being a 3/4. At the beginning of each player's end step, if no permanents left the battlefield that turn, that player loses X, where X is Saravok's power. This one's super interesting, as I could see it being ran in a group slug list, like Valgavoth, Harrower of Souls being another piece that can deal sizable damage to opponents if they don't have permanents leave the battlefield. But I think building a deck with this guy is where you'll get the most value. The build I was thinking is Saravek with Noble Heritage background, giving us protection from certain players that accept our deal of 1/1 counters, letting us sit behind Saravok for damage. Past that, running fog effects like Batwing Broom and Holy Day will prevent creatures from dying and leaving play during combat, while cards like Everybody Lives can give everyone's creatures hexproof and indestructible to make sure we can get some Saravok triggers. I think this build would also run a ton of sack lands like Myriad Landscape, Terramorphic Expanse, so that you could play the political game. Saravok only cares that a permanent left that turn. It doesn't care about whose permanent it was. So if you keep these sack lands open, you can start making deals with people for you to crack the land, prevent the Saravok trigger. Throw in some buff cards like Blackblade Reforged to make Saravok huge, and you've got some real big damage going on to people. I think this is actually a really cool build. Tuxel over on Patreon suggests Hearth Charm as our red card for the list, which is 1 red for an instant. You can choose one, destroy target artifact creature, or all attacking creatures get +1/+0 until end of turn, or target creature with power 2 or less is unblockable this turn. Yeah, I like this card. It's a pretty decent piece of artifact creature removal, which is a little specific, but it also provides a +1/+0 board buff for anyone's board. So if you're in a political or like group hug deck, I could see you using it that way as well. You can also put this thing underneath Isokron's Scepter if that's something you're interested in. I could see this being used if like another deck's playing tokens, swinging at one of your opponents, you go ahead and just buff their board so you can take one of your opponents out. Cool card. Tuxel will be fed his Salisbury steak tonight. The magic gods are pleased by this offering. Nantuko Cultivator is our green card for the list, which is 3 and a green for a 2/2. When Nantuko Cultivator comes into play, you may discard any number of land cards from your hand. Put that many 1/1 counters on Nantuko Cultivator and draw that many cards. This card's just good. I swore I'd talked about this before on the channel somewhere, but I cannot find it anywhere, so I'm talking about it again. Being able to dump a grip full of lands and draw cards is actually pretty nutty. And I know all about dumping grips, especially in a lands matter deck. Think of having 5 lands in your graveyard and playing Creeping Renaissance into this dude. 5 lands in hand, 5 more card draws in hand, a 7/7 in play. This card just feeds into the lands matter cycle so well, especially if you've got something like Tamir Sabertooth to just keep reusing it. Pretty solid. For our multicolor slot, we've got Viral's the Scar Stripe, which is 1, a black and a green for a 2/2. Each creature card in your graveyard has Scavenge. The Scavenge cost is equal to its mana cost. Sacrifice another creature, regenerate Viral's the Scar Stripe. This card is actually really, really gross. It's such an old card that I assumed it was a little bit weaker than I thought it was, and that it was ran in more decks because it's been around for a while. But nah, neither. Giving your whole graveyard Scavenge gives you a ton of value, especially if you don't really mess with recursion. You're not running a lot of it. All your creatures just make your future creatures bigger. Pair this effect with like the Ozolith, and your power just stays on board for generations. You're building up some generational wealth here. He also has a built-in sack outlet on him, which I don't know how I never noticed. This guy's just awesome. Not to mention if your deck has cards like Death Shadow, you can get a really cheap Scavenge for a ton of 1/1 counters. A lot of cool stuff you can do with this guy. Definitely check him out. Speaking of definitely check them out, Apocryphite is our colorless card of this round, and it is sick. For 2 colorless, we get a 1/1. If you played it from anywhere other than your hand, it enters with 3 1/1 counters on it, so it's 2 for a 4/4 if you play it from anywhere other than your hand. When it's put into your graveyard from play, remove it from the game with 3 times counters on it. In the right deck, this thing's really sweet, being only 2 mana for a 4/4 if you don't play it from hand. This isn't that bad to hit in a lot of just like play off top, play from exile deck, but there are certain commanders and cards that this interacts with really well. Decks like Rocco and Lelia both care about playing cards from exile, but also care about 1/1 counters, so the decks will already be running stuff like the Ozolith or All Will Be One, which when paired with Apocryphite is actually really nice. This could also be a somewhat win con in like an Amy Pond deck along with extra combat, so you can keep having it re-enter and then crack it and re-enter and crack it alongside like a sack outlet and an All Will Be One, maybe. I'm not 100% sure, but I really like this card. I think it could go in some decks and be really solid. Feels like an untapped powerhouse. Let me know what you guys think of it. And with that, we wrap up this week's Overlooked and Underplayed. If you want more lists like this, along with deck building advice, deck techs, and all sorts of different MTG content weekly, be sure to check out the channel. And if you dig it, subscribe. If you want to show some additional support to see more videos like this, like the people on screen have, head over to patreon.com/c/Nix Lotus, or click on the link in the description. Huge shout out to our patrons. You guys seriously help me out a ton. Make sure to check out some more videos over on the channel, and I'll see you guys next time. Later, guys.